Welcome to the Tech Intersect Podcast. Today we have Ambur C. Smith, Esquire, a dynamic leader whose legal acumen spans a multitude of industries, including sports, entertainment, fashion, tech, and wellness. I literally feel like she is the sister I did not know I had, and I'm so grateful to have her on the show as the founder and managing attorney of the law office of Ambur C. Smith, PLLC. She champions the protection of billion-dollar ideas and crafts groundbreaking deals with some of the world's most influential brands. And today we're going to dive into all things Ambur and her law practice. She is merging legal expertise with strategic business insights. I think that's a key intersection, particularly here on the Tech Intersect podcast. She's driving success. She is taking people from 2x to 10x. We will talk about all of that and more in a moment. But first, Ambur, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Evans. It is amazing to be here with you. And thank you for that intro. I mean, I'm
Uh,
sure,
we're on it.
it's definitely, it's accurate, but it's one thing when you hear someone deliver it the way that you did. So thank you for that.
I appreciate it. Hashtag no AI. I'm not an AI hater. It has
No
saved me
chat
millions of
GPT.
dollars. Right? But this one I had to put my thinking cap on because I want to use it properly. So welcome. So let's get
No.
into it. There's so much synergy in our mutual backgrounds and experience. When I came out of law school in '98, went to Howard Law, and I clerked in the Third Circuit for a year, and then went into big law and left probably 3 years later, kind of kicking and screaming. My mother is a patent attorney, a retired patent attorney. She worked at Roman Haas for a while and then DuPont, and ultimately had her own practice. So, and my dad's a retired surgeon who ultimately had his own practice. So I come from an entrepreneurial bunch of smarty pants folks. And so just thinking about your own path into what you do, particularly with intellectual property, technology, and the like, talk to us about your path into the work that you do now. And then we'll kind of take a step back and talk more broadly about some of the topics of concern in a Web3 economy.
No, thank you for that. And I mean, so amazing to hear, right, of how you managed to come about your career. I definitely, as you mentioned, there's lots of synergy here. I am not the child of attorneys, but I am the child of hardworking folks from the Midwest who encouraged me to go on and do whatever it is that I aspired to do. And so grew up right outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And upon graduating from high school, I went on to Hampton University, a historically black college and university in Southern Virginia. And it was there that I actually studied political science and pre-law. That was my first kind of foray into really understanding the way that resources are allocated within our communities and the barriers to access that exist for folks like you and I. And so immediately, it really sparked a desire to be an advocate for folks who looked like us. And immediately, based on my just early introduction to politics, dating as far back as high school, I saw law and politics as the best way to do that, and to be a legal and political advocate. And so throughout undergrad, I actually worked on a series of political campaigns. One of my first campaigns that I got to work on was actually the reelection campaign for President Barack Obama. And so you can
Amazing.
imagine that was just, such
Amazing.
I mean, just what a time to be alive, right? In 2012. And, it presented some amazing opportunities. I had the opportunity to introduce Michelle Obama, the first lady, forever FLOTUS, right? In
Right.
2012 when she came to Hampton University. And, it was just a reminder that I was going down the right path. And so, I continued to explore political strategy as an avenue to advocate for folks' civil and human rights. But before I graduated from college, I had the opportunity to travel abroad. And I think that was when I had the opportunity to really expand my horizon beyond just domestic policy and law, and political advocacy, and began to think globally around how I could be an effective advocate. Particularly, I went to Ghana, West Africa. And I think that is important because it kind of comes full circle when we think about, where are we seeing innovation, really what can I say, really, have the intended impact
Yes.
in the global economy that we're in right now. And so, having that experience very early on, really allowed for me to think bigger. And so immediately after graduating from Hampton, I went on to Georgetown, and I continued down the path of looking to be an advocate within the international human rights space. And
Mm-hmm.
so, again, it took me across the continent to South Africa to Kenya for various human rights projects. And, again, it was just a reminder that there was more that we could all be doing with the skill sets that we were developing. But of
Yeah.
course, it's important to be practical. And so upon graduating, I accepted a position to work for an Am Law 200 law firm in Cincinnati, Ohio, in their headquarters. And I specialize in commercial finance and banking. With the background that I had, you can imagine, and initially it felt like a fish out of water.
Mm-hmm.
But, after one summer working there as a summer associate, I figured I could get the hang of it, just like I had done with everything else, I'd accomplished up until that point. And quite frankly, I didn't see us represented within the commercial finance and banking practice groups of large law firms. And so I saw it as a worthy challenge, and it ended up being baptism by fire, right? At the time, I was working in commercial real estate, lender side real estate transactions, and it wasn't maybe the most exciting work that I had ever done, but again, it was giving me exposure to the type of resources that were being allocated to business owners, a lot of which did not look like us. And so, you mentioned, I think after 3 years, he left a bit disillusioned. And I too, after 2 years in corporate America, felt that same way. And it just so happened to coincide with the racial reckoning of 2020. And so I found myself at a crossroads, really eager to do more with the skill set that I had developed. And particularly in that moment to make sure that I was utilizing my political strategy background. And so I segued out of corporate law for the duration of the 2020 general election and helped to run the voter protection program in Ohio, where I was situated, and to empower voters, which in voting rights is a human right, right? And so once you have that understanding of international human rights law, you recognize the connection between what we dub as civil rights in America are truly human rights globally.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it was definitely the opportunity for me to really restore my faith and being, and the ability to be the legal and political advocate that I wanted to be. But of course, that was not a permanent opportunity because the election, ended. And while some folks disagree with the outcome, I personally was not disappointed in how the 2020 election turned out, at least nationally. And so, at that point, I had to make a decision. Would I, go back into corporate law and take on another major law firm position, or take a chance and bet on myself? And, coming from a family of entrepreneurs and a creative community, I decided to start my own practice. And so that was really how I ended up, having the firm that I have today and working with clients across industries. Really developed organically, but truly just from a desire to continue to be an advocate, but to do so on my own terms. And I think that what a lot of folks recognize during the pandemic is that technology empowers us to do things that we might not otherwise be able to do. And so, whereas, once upon a time you may have had to throw up a literal shingle in order to start a firm, I was able to throw up a virtual shingle, right? And so, with between a website and various software, legal research tools, G Suite, I was in a position to safely, right, protect my clients' information as it related to providing the legal resources that they needed. And so it's just been an amazing journey to see how things have evolved. Really excited to be coming up on my 4th year of practice in July, of independent practice. But at this point, really just excited to continue to explore. And of course, again, my story is intertwined with emerging technology. So grateful to be a part of this conversation today.
So I'm like trying to keep myself together because you, sis, I'm so, we are getting to know each other, and I'm so incredibly proud of you. The work that you are doing is so important. Betting on yourself. I have a thing, it's actually a registered trademark, darling. CEO
We
of
love
me.
trademarks. We love trademarks.
Love a good brand, darling. And what you are speaking of is really investing in yourself so that the best of your time, your talents, and your treasures are coming through you. They're not of you. and you are utilizing and identifying places and spaces for the purposes of empowerment. It's so powerful. I hope that I'm the cool aunt, right? I'm young on the outside, but I got some age on me on the inside. And so, but what I hear is my story. Fast forward, given it makes me think of I was one of the first people to have my own website when people weren't doing it. Like my first website was built on a thing called WebEx that came out of a box, right? One of my first experiential courses when I first started teaching law after 10 years of practice, I went out on my own. I worked with my mom in partnership for a bit. She moved on to do nonprofit work. I had my solo, and then I moved into academia. And I love experiential courses. I taught entertainment law. I was an entertainment and IP lawyer, focusing on literary law. Interestingly, I started in trust and estate stuff, and like 1.5 years in, I was like, Lord, what am I doing here? But I loved my trust and estates professor from Howard, and I think it was just more about that experience when I got in there. That wasn't really the work I wanted to do. Didn't have this for all the things. It's a whole other podcast to talk about the experience of navigating big law as an other, whatever your otherness is.
Mhm.
But also the power of having a background in an HBCU environment and having the confidence to move out and step out on faith to do what you know that you are trained to do, that you're empowered to do and blessed to do. And so I just want to take a moment to give you your flowers around that. And I also want to dive into this really interesting intersectionality that we're talking about at the axis of politics, law, and justice. And I separate out justice from law because we know kind of like the black letter law and things of that nature. But if we're at the intersection of that, you're talking about empowerment. You're talking about, and I want you to heighten this because I'm kind of just setting it up for you to riff a bit. This idea of politics has been coming up quite a bit. And I was having this conversation with someone who's like, why is everything have to be political? It's like literally everything is. It is about the allocation of resources and who we are empowering to allocate said resources. And you have to have identified that given the work that you're doing and the context in which you were doing it, not only for the Obama administration, but also when we think on the heels of George Floyd and the pandemonium and all of that. Just kind of, it's a kind of a broad-based area for you to step into and give us your thoughts and insights on the power at this intersection of law, politics, and justice.
No. Absolutely. You mentioned that having this background in HBCU or having attended HBCU, I think really did speak to my awareness and consciousness of the intersectionality of these things, and which is a critical race theory term, right? So again, we're hearkening back to theories that were developed within these diverse spaces. And it was a Hampton University professor who I think first coined the idea of, politics is who gets what, when, where, and why, right? And so in this space and in this era that we're in now, when we think about emerging technology, who has access to it, things of that nature, and we look at how government and politicians are struggling to regulate these industries, these emerging industries, it speaks to, what interest do they have in regulating them, right? Whereas they can continue to regulate through enforcement and take the, and allow, the private sector to take the lead and take hands-off approaches to things that have such a major effect on people's lives. I think it does speak to, again, who do they feel beholden to? Who do they feel an obligation toward? And I think it's so important for folks like you and I to be in these spaces. I actually was able to blend my understanding of this intersection more recently as a consultant for the family office of Arthur Hayes, who folks, they hear that name and, it maybe sparks a lot of feelings. But the reality is this was one of the first Black Americans to, gain wealth through cryptocurrency, right? Through digital assets. And of course, that is going to trigger, heightened attention from government, from politicians, right, and things of that nature in that space. But it's because it really speaks to. It's definitely gonna get some attention, right? But it speaks to who has access to research, who has access to generate wealth. And so, it was very interesting helping, support that office and looking into the development of financial literacy curriculum for youth to help make sure that the next generation is prepared to take advantage of these technologies. But the reality is that in order for curriculum to get into schools, there have to be political advocates, right, that are either mandating this to happen or folks within, the actual school systems to, see this as a priority. And unfortunately, there's just not the political, it's just not the most politically expedient thing for folks to champion right now. But
Right.
on a global stage, we're seeing how American youth are being left behind, as these technologies are being developed. So I think it does have everything to do with also what we're able to do with these technologies, and how we're able to achieve justice. And I would say, for me, it's a matter of racial and economic justice. If we want to be
Mhm.
clear about the types of justice that we mean, the communities that have been denied the ability to gain wealth historically are now presented with this new opportunity insofar as, the powers that be can come together and ensure they have access. And right now we're not seeing the coordination necessary for that to happen. But
Mhm.
fortunately, there is a will among folks like you and I. And I think that doing that work, consulting with that office and now in my practice and helping my clients incorporate these things, it's just a reminder that, we have to remain on the front lines, and no one is going to give us opportunity. No one is going to hand us resources. We're going to have to demand them.
Right. And I think that's why we see people of color in general, Black people in particular, throughout the diaspora, over-indexing in the crypto space, right? As we think about the wealth gap, let's just even stick here in the United States, for example, and basically 256 years to catch up, assuming nothing changes, and literally the only constant is change. So, like, it's incalculable what has been lost, and incalculable the amount of time that it would take, but for some, intervening, superseding factor. And I see that as being the crypto space. That there's such power and opportunity when you don't have those systemic gatekeepers, right? Either you have a
Mhm.
wallet or you don't. Either you have this asset or you don't. This cryptographically secured digital asset that, we're using the same types of technologies. We think of peer-to-peer technology, internet, cryptography, which has been around for millennia. As we try and encrypt messaging from one place and then have it decrypted at another place. And how do you get that quote unquote key to unlock, right? We're just doing it digitally at this point in time. The ability to do that for those who have systemically been kept out of the means of building wealth. And then when you do build wealth, how it can be bombed and disseminated, destroyed in an instant, right? Are we
Mhm.
now
Mhm.
working on indestructible wealth that is protected by technology in ways that the law has failed to do wholesale, right? And so that makes me think of a conversation that I had or I was listening to a conversation on a podcast where the host said, if you don't own assets, you are destined to be poor. And I sat with it and had to agree, because even though, I'm a Gen Xer, you get your education, get your six-figure job, get a home, I guess a burial plot, I don't know, well, a little vacation place on some little beach, and then you just ride it out. Um, what are the traditional approaches are no longer enough, and we weren't doing particularly well there, and not for lack of effort. When you think of redlining and all sorts of other things, if you don't have the right career that supports a 401k or some other retirement benefits, home and retirement benefits, if you didn't do anything else, you could ride out on that. Not so for our experience. And so, as I reflected on assets, and we think of capital assets, right? Things that are out in the world working harder than me, so I can be in the south of France minding my Black owned business or wherever I happen to be.
Mhm.
And what the next asset class would be. We have land and homes, IP, you have businesses, right? Stock market. This is the emerging asset class, also taxed from a capital gains point of view. Talk to us about the role. It's kind of I'm going to reduce it to two parts. One, just the nature of empowerment through assets that leads to the conversation of the protection of those assets, which you do so incredibly well. I know that you do that every day and twice on Sunday. So the ownership of digital assets that will empower, particularly in the Web3 economy. And then we can kind of lead into a discussion about what protection looks like from an IP and legal point of view.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, w- w- harkening back to the idea of why I started my practice is because the ownership was so important. And even then, maybe I didn't recognize how important it is, but it was something that I was conscious of. But again, because even though, as a younger millennial, I imagine, there we don't look to ride off into the sunset off of a retirement,
Better
fund or things
not.
of that nature. I think our generation is pretty much good. We're not planning to get any Social Security, right? So we know we got to be a bit more creative. The housing market is hardly accessible
Correct.
for a majority of folks, right?
Yes.
Outside of big law. And so, it really puts us in this difficult situation, but at the same time, it challenges us to be creative. And so I think that's why you're seeing so many folks in my generation and younger that are drawn to cryptocurrency, but particularly people of color, folks who are first generation, right, who have family who are in countries, that where the majority of folks are unbanked. And the reality is that you can go right to an urban community in America, and that's also the situation because underdeveloped nations and underdeveloped communities have so much in common. And so, I think it is really a matter of, just acknowledging that, the only opportunities you have that you can truly depend on are the ones you create. And in this case, the only assets and things of that nature, or the only thing that you can truly depend on to generate wealth are the things that you truly own. And so
Right.
whether that is just the business itself that you're operating, right, the intellectual property of that business, or in this case, it is a form of a digital asset, a non-fungible token, which is, typically some other form of creative invention, right, that is being captured and on the blockchain, right? And so, I think it is just a matter of really having an understanding of that being something that you can actually control, the idea of custody, right? That there is no intermediary like a bank, which we know have historically discriminated against certain folks. You're not
Right.
beholden to the person, the teller, or the investment banker, or whomever it is that you otherwise would have to interact with in order to trade in cryptocurrency, to trade in these different things. And so I think it is about taking the middleman out of the picture. Of course, it comes with risk. And I think that is why, especially for companies that are, dealing in digital assets and cryptocurrency, it's so important to make sure that you have the counsel that can help you navigate these legal landscapes. And for the individual investor, it's important for you to have some awareness. We speak about education, and I think as women of color, the mothers of civilization, the aunties of civilization, right? I think that we're naturally drawn toward raising awareness and educating our communities around these different topics. And I think that has always been, what interested me most about this because of, again, the baptism by fire that I've had to go through in order to operate in the spaces that I've operated in. No one was demystifying these things for me until I got there. What
Right.
difference would it have made if I had known, before I ever went to college, the opportunities that exist for IP attorneys, right? Maybe I would have taken a scientific route so that I could be a patent attorney. People don't
Right.
know that those things aren't available. And so I think it is about demystifying, the options that are available to people in the digital asset space, but ultimately, across industries, across technologies, for folks to really be able to make an informed decision on how they want to either invest or,
Hmm.
or otherwise interact with it. And so, yeah,
Let's
I'm
get
sure that was a roundabout way to
into
address the topic.
perfect. No, it's absolutely perfect because it brings me to the next point because you're hitting on something not just because so often, and I'm in my like the 200 something episode of Tech Intersect. I'm doing this since 2020. So thank you.
Love it.
And so
Yeah.
seeing just the evolution of my own approach to how I discuss these topics, there's a greater and greater need for professionals to get their professional lives together, right? I
Yeah.
do this program called Power Up Your Portfolio for investors and innovators in the space, but I'm starting to pivot to focus really on the professionals and how you can pivot your practice, power up and pivot your practice so that you end up
Mhm.
being more Netflix, not Blockbuster, right?
Mm.
It's like evolve or die in this moment. And I think
Yes.
professionals have the luxury of sitting back saying, all drug money, bad, scam. bad for the environment, too volatile, nothing to see here. And
Yeah.
then, at the top of this year, albeit reluctantly, Gensler and the SEC approved the first spot Bitcoin ETFs here in the United States. We're getting very close to the same for Ethereum. And so it's really a pain point at this time for professionals, not just financial professionals, because clients have questions, colleagues have questions. How do you develop your workforce to be relevant? And in fact, when I first entered the space in 2017, I believed all of the other things. It's the reason I wrote my book, Digital Money Demystified, last year. But I believed all the same things: drug money, I'm licensed in 4 states to practice law, lifetime to build your reputation, instant to ruin it, want nothing to see. But I also felt um, this overriding need and concern for my students to make sure they were prepared for the next wave of representation to stay ahead of the curve. Fell down the rabbit hole and the rest is history. But now it's like a clarion call for lawyers to get their acts together as a matter of ethics and a matter of relevance. The competence to practice law includes technological competence, and that's more than turning on your laptop in a pandemonium, right? Like you have to at least be able to spot the issues to know when you need to bring someone else in. So talk about what the every lawyer, like some things, maybe 2, 3 things that every lawyer should know about this space, and kind of use your own day in the life experience of the things that you have done, that you do, your expertise that has led you to your own trial by fire in your private practice, right? Separate and apart from big law, you had to learn a lot of stuff on the ground in order
Yeah.
to pivot and be relevant, and not now just relevant. You were literally leaps and bounds ahead of your colleagues when you left law school. Leaps and bounds. That's the other part of like the pride point. I didn't teach you, but I hear it. I know it when I see it. So there are things that you learn and that you had to learn to pivot with purpose. Let's educate our colleagues right now on that point.
No, this is great. I mean, that's an amazing question, and a few things immediately come to mind. So, I would say that one of the major paradigm shifts that I had to undergo in order to start my own practice was this idea of thinking like an owner, right? And of course,
Mm,
thinking like an owner, you are thinking about evolving, right, in order to remain competitive. In whatever industry you're operating in. Within the legal industry, one thing I became conscious of in having law firm economics classes and things of that nature in law school, was this idea that the traditional law firm model is unsustainable, right?
not
And
sustainable.
clients are begging for more flat fee arrangements, you're right, alternative fee arrangements and more virtual meeting options, things of that nature, everything that my firm was built on. Right. And
Right.
so, this idea, luckily for me, I had only been practicing for, several years at that point. So it wasn't
Mhm.
as much of a shift. However, working as an associate and billing hours to a particular practice group and a particular client is not the same as managing an entire practice. However, if you can put yourself into the shoes of your partner, right? If you are still an associate, that will serve you well in that space, right? As you're continuing to work for other folks. But as a result, it also will challenge you to think ahead, right?
Right.
What is happening in these emerging industries that this partner is going to need to be aware of? And I think for younger attorneys, it puts you in a position to be on the cutting edge of things that folks that are far more seasoned than you are, or maybe are a bit more risk averse to actually venture into. And so I think that's what served me well, probably a little bit of naivete, right? And just
Love it.
genuine childlike curiosity around, what the possibilities were for my career.
Yes.
But, the more I explore, the more I realize that there are opportunities because, one of the things that I live by is this idea that where there's neglect, there's opportunity. And so by not
Mm,
seeing folks that look like me doing this work, by not, seeing a lot of articles being written about different things within my law firm, it was a reminder that, okay, there's an opportunity here. And so just to follow that pathway with this idea of being an owner and thinking of how can you continue to, grow and make sure that your organization, whether you own it or not, is ahead of the curve. I think it's something to be conscious of. And this space, of course, challenges you to do that. Before I started to venture into fintech as just an extension of my genuine curiosity and foray into just emerging technologies, I had the opportunity to work with cannabis startups when I was still in big law. And, similar to fintech, right? A lot of folks it's drug money, right? Like you're
Right.
dealing with a schedule
Right.
at this point, right? This is Schedule 1, right? This is, federally illegal. And so now we're finally having this conversation around rescheduling marijuana, right?
Right.
But of course, the larger conversation is, it's exactly the same plant as hemp, right?
Right.
But for the THC content, and hemp is legal in all 50 states. So you're dealing with these patchwork legal frameworks. You're dealing with
Correct.
folks who are, considering this industry to be taboo, but you're taking a risk. Ultimately, for me, again, it was a matter of racial and economic justice. I saw the way the war on drugs had disenfranchised our community, and I saw the way people were building and generating generational wealth by investing in this industry all of a sudden. And so, it was perfect for me because I was operating at the time in the banking space. And that was where, that was a major pain point for cannabis startups. So I started to do research at the intersections of cannabis and banking. And
Right.
so in the same way, I think folks can look at how does emerging technology, how do digital assets intersect with other industries that they're working in, right? Because digital
Mm-hmm.
assets are disrupting the way everyone does business, right? Because if you're having to think of how your customers are paying for goods, right? How are you, how are investors, providing you the capital that you need to operate, right? If they can do that using digital capital, digital assets, then, that's definitely something worth exploring. So I would say also in the spirit of Tech Intersect, right? Look at the
Mm-hmm.
intersections between what you're already doing in this space and see where there's an opportunity so that you don't feel like a complete fish out of water and you do have that expertise that can, provide some initial comfort. But then finally, I would say just be okay with not being the smartest person. You know,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
as
Absolutely.
attorneys, we're the know-it-alls, right? Of our families, of our friend groups, right? We're always the smartest person, and I think that it's really difficult for us to put ourselves in the position of being a beginner after we've
Mm-hmm.
matriculated through decades worth of academic and academia in order to get to where we are. But the reality is that we always have to be learning, and I think working with startups is a great reminder of that because when investors are looking at who is the best investment. They're looking for people who are continuously learning, who are going to get the answers that they need, even if they don't have them immediately. And if you're doing something innovative, you're never going to have all the answers. So I think that's also a
The
good
nature of
sign.
innovation. Right.
So if you're feeling like a beginner, if you're not feeling like a know-it-all for once, it's probably a good sign at this stage in our careers. And so just embrace it, embrace the uncertainty, embrace just embrace the opportunity to not be the smartest person in the room for once.
Love it. I love everything about that, and it makes me think. Final. I gotta get you back to practice. I don't know if it's a billable hour, but
What
it's
do you
certainly
mean?
a
We could
flat
do this
fee.
all day.
Maybe we could do. I'm literally. The only thing keeping me from going on is to honor your time and to have you back. And I want to leave something on the table that people are like. We must have Attorney Smith back a second.
I love
But
it.
I've been working over the last few months to come up with. I love this conversation about continuing learning because we're literally, as lawyers, required to do so, right? Continuing
Yeah,
legal
yeah,
education. So let's get
yeah,
into
yeah.
that. And what that looks like, particularly given the fact that there's so few of us doing this work. I'll be
Yeah.
flying, by the time this airs, I may already be, or at least I'll be flying to the West Coast to do a Practicing Law Institute or PLI uh, all day session on, I think it's called like love, sex, and drugs in crypto or something like it's something sexy
Okay.
and provocative that
Yeah.
literally touches on all of the industries that suffer from the same issues of
Mm.
difficulty banking. When I think from a crypto and fintech point of view, and I spoke about this before Congress, it's like checkpoint 2.0. It may not be written down for public consumption, but it certainly is something that has prohibited and really stifled innovation in the United States with respect to financial technologies in general, but obviously crypto assets in particular, right? And so we need great lawyering, and all lawyers pass through law schools.
Mm.
When I think about when I was an associate dean at the University of New Hampshire School of Law, it was around the same time I was learning about this space and trying to make sense of how do I, again, how do I prepare my students for the next wave of lawyering, and what that looked like in my discipline, my expertise. So you mentioned this earlier as well, the intersection of intellectual property and technology, the creativity for me, and how like the disintermediation by this technology, which opened up all sorts of avenues of opportunity. One of the first law review articles that I wrote is titled "Crypto Kitties, Cryptography, and Copyright." Get into
Mm.
that. And so there
Yeah.
were just nobody
Yeah.
writing. I was basically booed off of stages by my colleagues, but today's prices are not yesterday's prices, so you're welcome.
Hello.
And,
Hello.
right, because, we were early, but we're right on time. I say all that to say I'm struggling trying to bring law schools forward to meet the moment as
Mm.
well. We're full of lawyers and we're trained to see the risk, the issues. And so I'm struggling with that bridge. We need folks like you. If you now this is a big box question. You ready? You ready, Amber C. Smith? If
Ooh, as ready as
Sure.
I'll ever be, right?
Let's go. Professor Evans is putting you on call now. Stand up, young lady. If you were to create a law school now or something of that nature where you were educating the next wave of lawyers, knowing what you know now and what you wish you had done then, what are some of the things that you would do in law school to make it an easier path for folks like you and like me to get into this space confidently?
Wow, that is a loaded question.
And you got 32 seconds. No, you take as much time. Let me sit back. Let me sit
No,
back.
no. I mean, that's such an important question. So, fun fact, in addition to the work that I do on behalf of startups and nonprofits and creative entrepreneurs, I'm really passionate about helping the next wave of diverse attorneys pass the bar exam, right? Because I do
Okay.
think that barrier exists, right? When we talk about access, we talk about access to the profession, and the reality is that for a lot of folks, that can be the crack they fall through that prevents them from getting into practice. And so, one, making sure that these universities are properly preparing folks, especially these top tier universities, right? Because when we think about first
Absolutely.
generation diverse students, even once we get into these top tier institutions, shout out to Georgetown Law, my alma
Mhm.
mater, we still are at a disadvantage by virtue of not, necessarily coming from families, where there are practicing attorneys. And if they are, right, there may be one or two, and there's the generational divide between you. And so it still doesn't necessarily give you the leg up that it might provide others. And so
Mhm.
I think finding a way, you know, to ensure one that that's not an impediment to them actually
Mhm.
going out into the profession. And a lot of it looks like just giving a bit more guidance in terms of how, you structure your curriculum, because a lot of it is elective, right? After that first year
Right.
course load. But, with that said, the bar exam is actually changing. And by 2026, they're going to have a next gen bar exam that is supposed to be more practical
Mm.
and address all of the concerns that folks have. And so, I can envision that there will be topics about emerging technology and things of that nature on the bar exam. Of course, the goal is to test you on more settled areas of law, but it's still something to consider. So I think first and foremost, we got to make sure that folks are going to be able to get into the profession. So
Right.
that's
That
number
part.
one. And if you're not at one of these top tier law schools, right, unfortunately, that isn't something, that is guaranteed by admission into law school. And so again,
Right.
making sure that we're giving folks the resources to overcome that final hurdle. But
Mhm.
substantively within their, law school journey, absolutely making it a requirement to take a technology course, a law and technology course. Georgetown has an Institute for Technology, Law, and Policy, and they've been doing some
Mm.
amazing programming around what's happening with artificial intelligence, right? What's happening with digital finance. Georgetown's own Chris Brummer is the
Yeah.
founder of DC FinTech Week as an extension of the institute that he runs on campus, right? And so using these various institutes within these organizations, within these larger institutions, to really make sure that we're incubating the next generation of technology lawyers. And the reality is that, as I mentioned, right, it's about looking at the intersection between the industry that you are interested in and technology. And so at this point, you really don't have the luxury of not identifying as
Right.
some form of a technology lawyer. You have to have some awareness because it is positively, depending on your perspective, I would say positively disrupting whatever industry you're a part of. So I think also finding a way to weave it into whatever subject matter is being taught. And making sure that the way in which students are interacting with the materials and things of that nature are also leveraging technology. I think that's important to be mindful of. And so, hopefully that addresses most of it. I mean, my
Amazing.
wheels are spinning. I'm going to have to
Yes.
keep thinking about this. But again, I'm thinking very practical, right? In terms of
Yes.
getting us through, getting us across, because 3 years is short.
Yeah.
Law school
No,
is it goes by so quick, and some schools I know they're toying with the idea of 2 year law schools, right? If you're a part-time student, at most you're going through another 4 years of graduate studies. And so I think it's just a matter of making sure that we're preparing folks for the specific task at hand that they're going to have to face, but to make sure that they're addressing certain issues that they are absolutely going to encounter once they get into practice.
outstanding. I'm going to have my people call your people. We have much more to talk on that topic. I have some things. So I will
Okay.
absolutely be following up. No, it's a really exciting time. That it's challenging, but it makes me think of any transitional point is painful until it's beautiful, right? When you think of
Mhm.
solace and then you think of a butterfly or any type of experience that is transformative can be painful, but when we lean into the opportunity, I think we are moving from a hyper competitive model, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, to a collaborative model. And those who will not pivot will also perish in some form or fashion. It's no longer fashionable to be siloed and hyper competitive at this point. Now, we love IP. I love, all of those things, but it can be a both and approach to making a world where there's enough and is good, and that there's the right access and allocation in order to support that. Not everybody supports that theory, but I think there are fewer of them than the rest of us. So let's get to the business of building the world that we want to see. And deliver some parting words. One, about more about your practice and any opportunities that you might want to share with the audience before we get out of here.
No, thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity to, share my thoughts on so many topics that I encounter on a day-to-day basis. As you mentioned, my practice is a virtual business and intellectual property firm catering to founder-led startups, nonprofits, and creative entrepreneurs across industries, with the goal of protecting their billion-dollar ideas. I say that because it's so important
Yes.
for us to understand that the possibilities are limitless, especially when you're properly leveraging IP, when you're properly leveraging emerging technology, where opportunities are truly unlimited, and specifically the ability to accelerate growth using these
Mhm.
resources, is truly unlimited, and also just prepare for success. I think I was listening. We think about the different podcasts. I'm definitely an avid podcast listener, and I know folks might be familiar with the Earn Your Leisure podcast, and I don't always listen to them, but when I do, they tend to drop some gems, and they talk about this idea that sometimes we don't prepare for success, right? We just assume it will come and one day we'll just be ready. But for business, that looks like establishing the proper entity, right? It looks like having those corporate governance documents intact, something I learned in working for multinational corporations, right? It
Yes.
looks like having your intellectual property protected, your trademarks, your copyrights, your patents, if that is relevant to whatever it is that you're developing. And and ultimately the goal is to give my clients the opportunity to, one, contribute to global innovation and technology, and just and innovation across industries, but then also develop the ability to build that generational wealth that so many communities have been denied historically. And there is this idea that maybe in yesteryear, right, that competitiveness and things of that nature required you, not to build coalitions and things of that nature. But that's not something that I think communities of color have ever been afforded the opportunity to do.
Fair.
And so, I also look at my firm as an opportunity to build community with like-minded folks and spark necessary dialogue around these conversations. And, if it turns into the opportunity to close some good deals with major brands that are looking to work with diverse founders, then hit me up, right? But
Yes.
in the meantime, I'm genuinely curious and excited about what folks are doing, leveraging technology, and just excited to continue doing that. So, you can learn more, visit my website, ambersmithlaw.com. That's AMBURSMITHLAW. And we actually are offering, we have a new business checklist that we offer to just kind of help you, consider all of what is important in terms of the development of a new venture. But then once you're prepared to, move beyond that, we offer legal strategy sessions that are really kind of our introduction to the firm. And fees for
Mm-hmm.
those strategy sessions are capable of being credited towards future services. So whether that is your trademark or, an overall business formation package and creating that entity that you need, things of that nature, those are opportunities that are available. And, once the episode drops, also hopefully maybe share some other, special offers for folks who are able to engage with the podcast,
Mm-hmm.
the final edited version. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, please reach out. We offer complimentary consultations as well, just to make sure that there's synergy between our firm and the business or, endeavor that you are embarking on.
I love it. I love it. I love it all. You dropped some serious gems. I am so delighted to be connected with you. I look forward to nation building with you. There's so much we can do when you come back, not if. We'll take a deep dive into IP in this Web3 space. There's so many interesting things going on,
So many
but I'm
things. We
excited
just
to
we
know.
we we
We didn't even
just the
scratch the
tip of the
surface.
iceberg.
Agreed. So y'all have to tune in again when we have our new family member, Ambur C. Smith Esquire, come back to the Tech Intersect Podcast. Amber, thank you so much. And again, we are connected, and this is the first of many wonderful conversations and also opportunities for people to learn and leverage their existing skills and expertise in the future of work and wealth and innovation. So thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. This is the perfect way to spend my Tuesday.
Outstanding. All right. Take care, everyone.